So a significant issue that relates to building longevity and the quality of health and safety around building occupation. It's the treatment of water, and buildings basically they serve many functions, both security and comfort, and also health. And a very important one of that is how we deal with water. Whether that's roofing and roof plumbing and ensuring that water goes in the right direction, or in sanitary plumbing and ensuring that water flows adequately out of building, or moisture flows adequately out of building, and any moisture that gets into the building or the building fabric or structure, that is exited from the building and doesn't cause issues. And that should be a continual focus of building designers and also builders in relation to how they think about that, and how they typically how you think about details, etc. So my previous work with M&Mdipclass9 engineers was a lot of reinstatement work and repair and reinstatement. I'd say the bulk of our work came from moisture issues. Yes, we had a lot from fire, like from building fires, a lot of impact damage from cars, etc. It's also another big one. But I'd say the bulk of the work was related somehow to the treatment of moisture and what that did in certain buildings. So a very important one is the waterproofing, and we'll have a look at that today. Also, in regards to the CSR Red Book, had a crack at uploading that onto Learn for you. The file is actually too big for Learn to accept it. So because it's too big for me to be able to put up there, that's something that you guys will have to search out yourself. So have a look for the CSR Red Book there, and keep that as a resource for yourself. We're also under waterproofing, we have the waterproofing wet area slides, and then there's also the video. So I'll leave the video for you guys to look at home yourself. It's an instructional video for people who are installing waterproofing membranes. So some of it pertinent, but we'll cover the bulk of that within the slides today as well. So that's optional as to whether you want to have a look at that yourself in your own time. But certainly, waterproofing of wet areas within buildings, it's incredibly important. Causes so much undue damage, inappropriate waterproofing, and because waterproofing is typically located underneath tiles and bathroom fit-outs, etc., it can be very expensive to repair and to replace a breached, membrane. So it's important that the membranes are done properly initially, and there are standards as set out by the National Construction Code on how you waterproof various different scenarios. But I think because our actual waterproofing membrane products are not very expensive in the context of building a house, and not very expensive in the context of what they would cost to repair, it's always best to be fairly liberal with the application of those products and exceed the codes where you can, to be a bit extra safe, because we're talking hundreds of dollars of material versus sort of multiple thousands of dollars for repairs. So check the project specification, confirm that the product and processes specified are suitable and can practically be applied. So that comes down to designers and details, and understanding whether those details are actually or can actually be fabricated on site. It's also important to check whether the products specified are compatible. So the manufacturers will give information about compatibility with various different products, and I guess that's certainly made easier by going with a particular supplier or manufacturer. Typically, they they will supply products which are compatible. Where the products are different from different manufacturers, can they be used together, and where does the warranty lie? That is quite a difficult issue at times about where the warranty lies with certain things. I had to do an analysis of a failed waterproofing membrane on top of a garage. It was for somebody who's fairly wealthy and fairly well known. Had a whole lot of cars underneath in this garage, underneath the tennis court. That tennis court had a waterproofing membrane under that surface, and of course that not of course, but that waterproof membrane leaked, and had to cut out all these little squares to analyse the thickness and the appropriate application of that waterproof membrane to work out who was responsible for actually repairing that leak, and also compensating for the damage of these vehicles and so on underneath. So fairly how do I say it, fairly inexpensive thing to do a waterproofing membrane over top of this garage, but incredibly expensive thing to rectify the damage as a result, and a very long, protracted process in determining who was actually liable for that as well. And so these liability issues crop up all the time, and it's best to ensure that you're not going to be part of that. All materials, including products and tools required, are on site or available. Well, that's going to be the responsibility of the people installing the membrane. In the application of a waterproofing system, the waterproofing contractor must prevent the passage of water from one room to another, regardless of whether the contractor has adhered to every aspect of the Australian standards and the right materials have been used in strict accordance with the manufacturer's product data sheets. If water leaks occur, the contractor is liable. So does anybody want to be a waterproofing contractor? And it's a funny quirk of the National Construction Code in this aspect, is that there is a note within the National Construction Code saying that it specifies how all these waterproofing membranes should be done in various different scenarios, and we'll look at that. But the National Construction Code also states that if a waterproofing membrane fails, then it doesn't meet the standard, which is an odd thing. It's an odd thing to include. Well, on the surface, it appears to be an odd thing to include in the National Construction Code to say, look, this is how we do it all. But if you do it all in accordance with this and it still fails, well, then it doesn't comply. That's basically, I guess, the National Construction Code taking a very strong line on saying waterproofing is incredibly important. You must, as the contractor for installing a waterproofing, you must ensure that it does not fail. The waterproofing contractor accepts responsibilities from time of work commencement. The principal ones are condition of the substrate and building. So when a waterproofing contractor commences work on a waterproofing job, it is deemed that he has accepted all substrates as being suitable for membrane application. So they've got to understand whether that surface is suitable, and they are the best ones to assess that at the time of the day. Somebody could come along and say, yes, that surface is suitable for application, and then conditions change within that week or within that time period. And so it's important for people installing that membrane to ensure that everything is suitable. So such changes can be, let's talk about a standard sort of bathroom within a building that's being built. Within that time, before somebody goes installing the waterproofing membrane, the tilers might have been in for other sections, and there's all sorts of dust and dirt and so on the floor, or various other trades, etc. Get stuff on that substrate. That substrate could be damaged, or various other liquids and water and so on that concrete. So conditions can change, and people installing the membrane have to ensure at that time that it's suitable. If at a later date it is proven the substrate was unsuitable, such as too rough, or the building is deficient, gaps between wall paddings too great, it is the waterproofing contractor's responsibility. So they have to assess these things when they get to site. So all surfaces must be suitable to accept a waterproofing membrane. They must be smooth, porous and sound, or the contract should include cost to remedy such situations. In the application of a negative side hydrostatic membrane, for example, internal basement walls ensure the substrate is sufficiently strong to withstand the hydrostatic pressures. What that means, so with our negative side and positive side application of membranes, that I'll just draw a very simple. Let's say this is a retaining wall, and our soil is on this side. So this is our source of moisture. Our moisture is coming from this soil, and let's say this is inside the house. So we're inside here. Our positive side membrane is there. So that's always going to be the easiest one to apply, because water is wanting to go this way. Our substrate is certainly going to be typically drier than the environment, so we're going to have decent adhesion on this side, and we're not going to have water trying to seep through there and deposit the salts and so on attacking this substrate. So that's the positive side. They're always much easier to apply and to maintain. Negative side membrane, that's on the inside, where we've got passage of moisture coming in from behind that membrane, through the substrate and behind the membrane. This sort of application is far riskier, far more difficult, and prone to failure. So if we are thinking about designing something, it's far better to ensure that waterproofing is done and detailed with the initial details, rather than any sort of rectification work done later on. Because obviously once we've built this and all this soil here is here, for example, it is very difficult to get into here. So there's that motivation to do a negative side membrane, but they're far more difficult, far riskier. So variations from standard and or variations from good practice that are required should be approved by owner or prime contractor in writing before commencing work. So very important because we're dealing with significant liabilities, it's great to get these things in writing. Surface preparation for waterproofing must be structurally sound. So Adelaide is built on a place with fairly reactive soils. We've got a lot of movement. We have to design for that, and that is because waterproofing membranes have some flexibility, but they're not. Well, I said our modern waterproofing membranes are becoming even more flexible. It's fantastic, but there's still a lot of structural stability which is required underneath, because we do have gaps and cracks opening up, and membranes can only be stretched so far. Certainly clean and free from contamination materials. So a membrane bond will fail at its weakest point, so if applied over dust, loose material or poorly bonded contaminates, it will fail prematurely. So it has to be a good clean substrate. Repair any holes or voids in the substrate. So a nice, smooth, slightly rough and porous texture of that substrate, but something without holes and things is going to be far easier to waterproof. And remove any protrusions and sharp edges. A uniform thickness membrane is very difficult to achieve over protrusions or sharp edges. And that was the assessment we had to do on that tennis court, was to assess whether it was uniform thickness throughout, which can be a difficult thing to achieve on certain substrates. Concrete should be aged for 28 days, and screeds should be aged for 7 days. So if this is our bathroom here, so we just made the retaining wall our bathroom. This is our concrete, it's 28 days. And a bit of a reminder for and in regards to those who had a look at the site visit last week as well. So our slabs that have set downs, wet areas, typically it's going to be around that 50 millimetres. That's dictated by how much slope, how much fall we want to have in the floor. So we have, this might be our typical slab height, but our wet area is set down, let's say 50 millimetres. We have that sloping to a drain in our floor, and then we put our screed on the top. So our screed, that's what actually creates the fall to the drain. So that screed has to be applied very well, very carefully to ensure that falls happen in the right direction. But that has to be 7 days old before an application of the membrane. Can anybody tell me why the concrete would have to be 28 days old? Yep, certainly, yep. So by 28 days it's done the vast bulk of its shrinkage and moisture loss. But also that 28 days, that is also a legal point as well. So the design strength of concrete is the strength of that concrete at 28 days old. So when you say I want N20 grade structural concrete, and you go to Bowl, for example, they produce that will be N20 grade at 28 days. And so at that point we can say yes, the concrete, well, we can be fairly sure that concrete is not going to shrink anymore, but it's also reached its structural strength. So if there's any cracking, anything that's happened in that concrete in that time, well, if there's any cracking that's going to happen, it should show up in that 28 days. And then our screed has to be solid enough and firm enough to work on, and also have done the bulk of its shrinkage and movement by that 7 days. So ensure substrate is dry. High substrate moisture content will form blisters of membrane during curing. So it has to be dry. And it says seal wet or freshly laid concrete with Ardex, blah blah blah. So Ardex, they are the people that produce these slides and produce these membranes. So one of the companies that produce waterproofing membranes. So you'll see some of their products specified throughout. Types of under tile membranes. So wet areas, we've got bathrooms, shower recesses, laundries, toilets, and balconies. Balconies, I think, is one thing which does get overlooked a bit. People think, okay, really important to waterproof bathrooms, which it is. It is incredibly important to waterproof bathrooms, and to a lesser extent, laundries and toilets. But what is also what threw up so much work for us at M&Mdipclass9 was the poor waterproofing of balconies. Not thinking about slopes to drain water away from the building, not thinking about materials for balconies. We had one place down near Victor Harbour where they carried the structure floor, so that's the chipboard flooring for a second story. That structure floor they used inside, they carried that outside as well onto the balcony and just tiled above that. And of course, structure floor is not really solid, not really firm. It will move slightly when you've got a timber frame building that moves slightly. So the waterproofing failed, water got into that structure floor and whipped that moisture back into the building, destroying the flooring in the building. And when you've got a floor or a flooring material that's inappropriate used on a balcony and then that destroys the flooring on the inside of the balcony, that's an incredibly expensive thing to repair, because your damage goes underneath your existing walls, etc. in that scenario. So it's an incredibly difficult, expensive thing to repair, and that came down to material choices. So you should never use structure floor in an external application, and I'm just going to say if you do, but you shouldn't. You should always have a break in materials between your balcony and your interior. You should not have the ability of moisture to be able to be whipped from your exterior balcony through to the inside of the building, because once you start dealing with inside structures, it's very expensive to repair. And also on that place, the floor joists had to be replaced as well because of that moisture. And I guess also, and that's probably another consideration for design, is think about the use of buildings and how they're going to be occupied. So a building which is, say, in town here and people live in that on a daily basis, if there's any moisture issues, those issues will be picked up or noticed very quickly. If you're dealing with coastal properties that are holiday homes that may get used very infrequently, you can have a moisture issue happening over, let's say over winter time when that coastal property is not used very much, and that can be happening for 6 months before it gets noticed, in which time significant damage can happen. So details around, particularly around these things, are incredibly important when we're dealing with seaside properties and properties which are infrequently used as well. So back to our slides. Waterproofing is the formation of a vapor barrier designed to prevent water entering or escaping from various sections or rooms of building structures. And water damage is one of the biggest problems faced by the building industry, as we've already covered. So legislation. So similar to just about everything else we've covered in this subject, covered extensively within the National Construction Code, and that references two Australian standards. So references Australian Standard 3740 and Australian Standard 4858. So that's in regards to installation of waterproof membranes in internal wet areas. One thing you may be called upon to do as designers or drafters are produce wet area details. If you are, I guess that has to be taken very seriously, and those details should be taken from these Australian standards. However, there are also significant details covering this within the National Construction Code as well. We'll see some of those details as we go along. What we had at Mount Proprietor was, and it wasn't set up by me, it was set up by one of the engineers, a wet area details library. So a whole block library of wet area details for various different situations and scenarios, but then also an all-encompassing wet area details block that would happen over 3 separate pages. So those 3 separate pages can be attached to any set of drawings. So we have our complete drawing set of the building, and then we attach the wet area details to that end. So we have standard details that only get updated when things in the National Construction Code get updated, and that's possibly the easiest way to manage all of your wet area details, rather than drawing things specifically or situationally specifically. You get those things all set up, and you have that as a pre-drawn block. That makes it much, reduces the incidence of making mistakes on that. So plenty of details contained within both the National Construction Code and the Australian standards. When it comes to designing any wet area details, refer to those. There's also an Australian standard for manufacture and detailing of shower screens, an Australian standard for acceptability and compatibility of direct fixing to under-tile membranes, and Australian standard for construction, detailing, waterproofing of external balconies and decks. So 3740, and we'll go through this relatively quickly, governs the required application of the waterproof membrane, including the minimum surfaces within an internal wet area to be waterproof and the surfaces that must be water resistant. And as mentioned before, note that there is still an overriding clause in BCA that the waterproofing membrane shall prevent water transferring from one room to another, regardless of whether or not the waterproofing was done in accordance with a standard. So there is that interesting clause within the National Construction Code that shifts liability onto those responsible for the application of the membrane. be aware that there are different flexibilities of waterproofing membranes. So this is information that your product manufacturer should be able to supply you with and help you out with. But because there are different flexibilities of waterproofing membranes, there are different details which need to be drawn for each of these. These details are actually covered within the National Construction Code, so you have very detailed drawings within the National Construction Code that show the type of application for various different flexibilities. So low flexibility, medium flexibility and high flexibility. So we have various different joint details as a result. So this doesn't relate to the building structure or the building substrate, it relates to the actual flexibility of the membrane, so the type of the membrane. So with low flexibility membranes, you need to have a bond breaker rod. Medium flexibility, you have to have the tape in behind, and then the high flexibility, it's a corner cove bead of silicon, sealant. It's not always necessarily silicon. That has all your materials have to be compatible, and that's up to product or your product manufacturer to specify what sealants you use behind your membrane. So that's rehashing, we've already spoken about. So membranes may be placed under or over the tile bed screed. Typically they're placed over the tile bed screed. So we have our screed go down, that's given adequate time to cure, so typically 7 days, and then the waterproof membrane goes in over the top of that. There are issues with underbed screed, so underbed screed remains saturated, breeding mould, fungi and odours, or potential for that. The bed screed must bond firmly to the membrane, which there are issues around that. And logistical benefits of multiple trade insulation are your waterproof tiler. Never really think of why you would waterproof an area before the tile bed screed goes down. It's just about rushing through projects, basically. So if you have to wait, you put your tile bed screed down and you've got to wait 7 days before you go in, putting your waterproofing membrane on, that's 7 days within that construction time which is lost. If you're going to be a project home builder that are putting up houses very rapidly, moving through a project very quickly, in as little as 12 weeks, that's a whole week in that process that can be lost. So time waiting for things to happen. So it's about rushing things through. So it's important within the scheduling that those things are thought about, and they get somebody in to do that tile bed screed nice and early. Once our internal walls are set up, our roof is on top, that tile bed screed should go down while other trades are working on the building, such as plumbing and electrical. So Ardex produce various simple details for installation. These are their details for the applicator to refer to on site. However, as a legal as a best practice approach, as designers, you should develop your waterproofing details as per the National Construction Code. Attach those to your drawings with reference to the National Construction Code and appropriate Australian standards, and then the applicator has to apply those membranes according to your details, but also within adherence to the manufacturer's details. So we don't provide details, or typically, or sometimes we're called upon to provide details as per manufacturers, but typically let the manufacturers deal with that, and you have to ensure that all of your details that you include within your drawings adhere to the National Construction Code and the Australian standards. So you may find some differences also between these details. Basically, what I'm saying is, for the formulation of details, refer to the National Construction Code. But these are handy for us to understand. So a shower with a hob. So a hob, that's just a small piece of material. It's non-timber, so it can be some of the recycled. So there's recycled some manufactured timber made from recycled plastic bags, which is good for these sort of uses, and then or also fibre cement sheet. So we don't want to use materials that will take up moisture. So we don't want to use timber. We don't want to use metal in hobs, because metals corrode, and when they corrode, they expand and they cause issues. So typically, like cementitious products or some of these plastic products made from recycled plastic bags are good in wet areas. So our hob that's down here underneath our door, it's just a handy thing to stop moisture going into the room when we have an enclosed shower. It's not a popular design type thing. If you flick through many architectural magazines or so, you won't really, in glamorous bathrooms, you won't see hobs used typically, because there's that visual intrusion of the hob, particularly, but also there's so it looks less glamorous, but there are also tripping hazards involved. But it's certainly very important for stopping the transmission of moisture or the flowing of moisture out of the shower. So this is just the membrane within the shower, and that's carried up and over the hob for obvious reasons, and 25 millimetres up the internal face of the wall. To reiterate, timber must not be used. So some details here showing our mortar bed, that's our tile screed, showing the slope back towards a drain. And then our various different layers. So we've got our waterproof membrane, and then our tile adhesive, then our tiles on top, and the location, a bed of sealant along that outer edge of our shower to stop the egress of moisture back underneath that shower frame, and so it goes off the front of that hob for when small amount of moisture make it outside the shower. Various different step-down details, or this step-down detail. That's where we don't have a hob, but we have a recessed shower base. The typical detail for a hobless or an unenclosed shower. So that's typically what you deal with modern construction. So we have our screen, and then a small retainer at the base of the screen with a bead of silicone. And note that the substrate for our tile screen slopes away in both directions. So what we're going to have where we have an unenclosed shower, we're going to have a floor trap elsewhere in the room, because there's the possibility of moisture, or large amounts of moisture, making its way out of that shower, because we don't have a hob. And so we also need to have a floor trap, and our shower floor needs to slope back to our shower drain, but then the remainder of our floor, our bathroom floor, has to slope back towards our floor trap. That's important, and that's an important consideration for the designer, because the designer needs to understand the extent of the bathroom set down that is required for that. So you need to look at the National Construction Code to determine what your flooring walls have to be back towards your drain, and how much set down you need to achieve that floor slope back to the drain. And that may cause some issues. Typically, if you're dealing with two-story timber-framed floors, set downs can be more difficult to achieve. And an enclosed shower without a hob, so that's where we have a frame which is essentially performing duty of a hob. So enclosing the shower, we have a water stop, and we have the membrane carrier on the inside face of that water stop. With an unenclosed shower, it requires more waterproofing of that floor area, which, given the expense of the actual waterproofing membranes, we're talking hundreds or total project cost there, sort of possibly around the low thousands to waterproof. Not ridiculously expensive. So that's why these sort of frameless or unenclosed showers are becoming far more popular, because it's a beautiful aesthetic and functionality, but not too expensive to achieve. But beware that there are different waterproofing requirements for an unenclosed or an enclosed shower, because if you're going to take an old house and do some sort of retrofitting thing, then if you remove that shower base that was there, the waterproofing details need to be, or the waterproofing needs to be updated to comply with that. So for our unenclosed shower, we've got a radius of 1500 millimetres to waterproof from the wall at which the shower rose fixes to. So we've got 1500 millimetres to waterproof. Here are some details in regards to a shower recess. So just listing those areas. So the wall floor sheeting joint. Number 2 says no timber hobs. We just flick through that. That's something you can refer to or back at home if you wish, but it's just covering, I think, a lot of details you already understand. Within our showers has to be either waterproof or water resistant, and the National Construction Code makes that distinction for various different scenarios. But it has to be waterproof or water resistant up to 1800 millimetres or to 1800 millimetres in height within the shower. Typically, it's you might as well carry out that waterproofing higher, but the bare minimum is 1800 millimetres. Our showers have to have a minimum 25 millimetre set down if it's a recessed shower, and 100 millimetres protrusion of that waterproofing over the entire floor if drainage outlet exists in floor or floor is timber. If not, it has to go out a minimum of 100 millimetres past our shower. So details of shower with a hob. So once again, very similar. We've got, our waterproofing is reduced to 75 millimetres outside that hob as opposed to 100 with an enclosed shower. But note on here, we've got our waterproofing up 1800 millimetres up the wall, and then that waterproofing is also carried around the wall floor joint of the entire room.
So would you just go ahead and just waterproof the whole floor?
See, I would.
Because everyone that I've ever seen has been a whole floor.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So this covers the minimum requirements, and these, this is the product manufacturer's details, which are fairly closely aligned to the details that you see within the National Construction Code. These are the minimum details that need to be set out. But yeah, the building code or the National Construction Code sets out the minimum standard for building. But typically, for some things where it's so much, where there's not a lot of expense involved, and it makes it much easier. Yeah, these, this is one of those examples where just the whole thing gets waterproofed, because that gives you flexibility as well for changing that bathroom use later on. If you want to have an unenclosed shower, you can do that because the whole floor is waterproof. So yeah, that's what I would strongly suggest as well. Just do the whole floor. But if you're going to do the whole floor, just ensure that you have that waterproofing carried up all the walls adequately as well. So meet all those minimum standards for that. So once again, 1500mm radius for the shower head, where we have an unenclosed shower. Oh, also this is an important thing to note. Well, important possibly. If you're going to waterproof the whole floor, then it's not an important thing to note. But if you're going to take the stingy route, note if a handheld shower is installed, waterproof all areas 1500mm from the furthest point of the hand outlet when fully extended. So, and that throws up an interesting liability thing. If the builder goes, all right, all I have to do is waterproof to 1500mm from that shower rose as we're installing it, and that's all that they do. And then later on, the occupants go, oh, I don't like that shower rose. I'm going to put in one with the extendable hose on it, and they retrofit that, which is a very simple thing to do. All of a sudden, the waterproofing requirements have to be 1500mm from the extent of that hose, and who's liable for that? So yeah, once again, just waterproof the whole floor. Get me on that. Some more details. So these are all under screed details, by the way. I'm sure Ardex would have over screed details as well. Nothing too much to see in that we don't understand already. So within the National Construction Code, as I mentioned before, makes the distinction between waterproof and water resistant. So that's our minimum standards. This product manufacturer, they say you should just waterproof all the water resistant areas anyhow. I guess it certainly works in their favour. They'll sell more product, but it makes it much simpler as well. So water resistant doesn't necessarily have to stop or entirely stop the passage of moisture. It just has to resist the passage of moisture. So the water resistant product would be a fibre cement sheet. So it's not entirely waterproof, but it is water resistant. Yeah, we'll keep flicking through these. So these are more case specific. So some details around the bathroom. So we've got the reinforced tape for the joints and a bond breaker in behind. That waterproofing membrane turns down into the drain, and the good surface, adequate membrane thickness. Keep flicking through. Just a quick note on the two different types of typically doing a floor trap or installing the floor drain to the floor trap. One of those is to have what's called a puddle flange, which enables the capture of moisture from under your tiles. So it enables any moisture that makes its way through your grout in your tiles and goes under the tiles, it enables that exiting of moisture under your tiles. So it's typically the standard for the installation of a floor drain now is to use this puddle flange. And the old, do we have So we've got our two examples here. That's the design for a standard drain without using a puddle flange. So a puddle flange is just this little PVC top hat type thing. What you should not do when you use one of those PVC top hat puddle flanges is carry your waterproofing all the way down into that drain, because then the installation of that puddle flange can damage the waterproofing. So our base to our puddle flange is designed to be waterproof and should not actually have the waterproofing membrane on it. And then that puddle flange has to go on top of that. Also, you need that moisture to exit from under your tiles as well into the puddle flange. Whereas if it's just a standard drain without a puddle flange, then that waterproofing does have to be carried down into that. So this is important just so if you're on site and you see a detail like this which looks particularly poor, so we look at that and we go, oh, the person doing the waterproofing hasn't done the right thing, that detail looks shocking. It's actually the correct way to do that, because we have to have our moisture exiting through here, and when we install that top hat, we don't want to destroy our membrane there. Whereas if it's just a standard floor drain, well then they do have to adequately waterproof everything. Covered that. Frameless showers are deemed to be open showers, fairly self-evident. Yeah, we've covered those things. So some details in regards to the standard details. So a typical wall floor joint, 6mm gap as recommended by sheet lining manufacturers, because we get some movement typically within a timber frame, and then also some expansion and contraction of materials. And then 10mm bead of neutral cure silicon sealant tooled to a concave finish. Some more details. So these are very simple details. Once again, I suggest you go to the National Construction Code and draw your details, produce your details in exact accordance with the National Construction Code, rather than the more simplistic details in the product literature. But these are certainly a bit easier to read and understand within the context of a presentation. So once again, 6mm gap, but a backing rod to form that flexible piece. Can anyone tell me what would happen if we didn't put in a piece of backing rod in that scenario? So typically our backing rod, that's just this. Has anybody seen backing rod before? No, lots of shakes. I'm pretty sure there's some in the storeroom there. It might take a little while to fish out. But it's this white, fairly crunchy, malleable foam rod. You might have seen it in the hardware store, just in rolls of it, or on construction sites, bits and pieces of it lying around. So you get it in large rolls, and you've got various different sizes of it. So this backing rod, it's a foam which is relatively firm but very cheap to produce, and that rod is just pushed into gaps where we want to stop things like concrete going into those gaps. So the idea of that bit of foam that squashes in under our sheet there is just to stop that tile screed from going in under that sheeting when the tile screed is installed. So that allows some movement, some flexibility of that wall. If we didn't have movement and flexibility there, then we might get that wall sheeting failing in certain aspects. And if we get that wall sheeting failing, well then that may cause a failure of our membrane. So we have some inbuilt flexibility into our membrane by having that silicon around the corner there. And then we also have some assurance of flexibility for our substrate by having a piece of backing rod at the base there to achieve that. Now just some reflections. So quickly, don't use timber hobs. Hobs at shower screen entry doors should slope inwards. Shower screens fixed to the inside edge. Ensure outlet pipes are fixed securely and the waste or drainage flanges are recessed into the floor. Screeds should be improved with an abacrete additive. So that's one of their products. Ensure that falls to the waste a minimum 1 in 60 in shower recess and minimum 1 in 80 in bathrooms. So that's something you as designers have to take into consideration, how you can achieve that 1 in 80 fall in your floor to your floor waste. So ensure that sheet joints are treated with a neutral cure of silicon sealant. Apply a bead of neutral silicon bond breaker to all horizontal and vertical corners, also at the junction of the hob and angle walls. So treat nail and screw holes with silicon and seal the perimeter of tapped shower outlets and waste outlets with silicon bond breaker as well. Has anybody seen application of silicon in bathrooms and so on? Seen the neat tricks that the plumbers employ with that. Some fairly simple tricks. Where you put down, so you've got a joint, put down your bead of silicon, all dry, and then spray it with a what's it called it's water with a bit of detergent in it, and also a bit of vinegar that enables you then to scrape off the excess silicon without that silicon bonding to anything. So you can get those nice concave bits of silicon. They're very simple trick. Ensure all surfaces to be waterproof and primed. Apply the membrane to the entire shower recess floor and down into drainage flange. Apply the membrane over the hob. Reinforce corners, coating areas and drainage flanges with polyester cloth between two coats. So you paint, and you'll see this in the video. So you'll see that application of that. Also, that reinforcing mat is fully wetted out and free from creases and air pockets. So you'll see that in the video as well. Ensure that basically you've got the thickness is uniform, and always protect applied membrane from mechanical damage, particularly during tiling operations. So that's a consideration of the tiler. Certainly what the tiler does not want to do is damage that membrane. So balconies and decks, as I mentioned before, it's very important to consider the materials that are used for those balconies and decks. Concrete must be cleaned and open forward. All concrete curing membrane must be removed. So, we covered we talked about our slabs earlier on, that typically a way of curing concrete now is to use a curing compound on top rather than plastic sheets, because it's very quick and easy for the concreters. But those products can interfere with other products that have to go on top of that concrete, so adhesives and waterproofing membranes. Compressed fibre cement sheets, tight and fixing in accordance with manufacturer's recommendations. Sanded to remove manufacturer's sealer and open up the pores. So all the fibre cement, well, not all fibre cement, actually yes, no, all of the fibre cement sheet products you can buy are sealed with a waterproof or water resistant sealer. That has to be sanded back when you apply the membrane to ensure that the membrane will stick to that fibre cement sheet. And then the obvious, also, so screw or twist thread nails fixed. There is at 450 centres. 450 centres is also a very typical spacing for any waterproof substrates. So for within a timber frame building, typically you specify all of your studs at 600 centres except for in wet areas. Then you specify your studs at 450 centres to take the waterproof or the water resistant sheeting. And also decks, or particularly more importantly balconies, have to be constructed with falls in mind. So a slope of 1:50 on that surface, and that has to slope away from the building, so away from doors and so on and walls. That's probably the most important aspect for consideration for designers. So suitable balcony and deck cladding materials, so no structural floor. So timber type and fixing in accordance with manufacturer's recommendations if applicable. Sanded and free from all sealers, coatings and other surface contaminants. So some details in regards to external applications. So we've got minimum fall to edge or drains, 1:100, but 1:100 is actually a fairly difficult fall to achieve, so I suggest going slightly higher than that. Minimum 50mm set down, so you want to ensure that the balcony or that floor area is actually set down from the inside. Treatment of sheet or movement joints, so have to ensure that those joints stay closed. So here we have a movement joint, and as with any form of control joint within a building, where we have that control joint happening, it's carried through other materials. So in this instance, we have a control joint there, so we have a sheet joint happening between our sheets, and then once again that ubiquitous piece of backing rod that goes in there to help form a substrate for our silicon sealant, and then that's got our reinforcing cloth over top, and then our waterproofing membrane goes over top of that. But the important thing here is that control joint detail is carried through the material, so we don't have tiles going straight over top of that joint, because that joint, we accept that joint is going to move, and we don't want anything solid going on top of that. If we did put a tile directly over top of that joint, we risk either that tile cracking and having a sharp edge to that tile, or even worse, that tile popping off and compromising the waterproofing underneath. And a tile popping off creates a well, or a space for water to aggregate, and if it's compromised the waterproofing membrane, well then those two things combine to cause a lot of water leakage. Also details for planters and designing the waterproofing for planters. The common cause of the waterproofing failure, we've got movements of building, thermal, moisture, shrinkage, vibration and structural, and then also poor installation. So inadequate surface preparation, insufficient film thickness, incomplete wetting of reinforcement, and inadequate curing of either the concrete or the curing compound. The concrete or the waterproofing layer. Very important for concrete is to get that right, that falls happen in the right direction. Such a scenario is a very difficult thing to rectify. Various different ways, I guess, to rectify that scenario. But most importantly, it's, understand that sort of issue is very, very difficult to rectify. As a designer, it's best that you cover yourself by by mentioning or by putting on the drawings that if we've got a concrete slab to the outside, that falls have to happen away from the building. So specify that the fall has to happen and specify the fall. So this is a scenario just where there wasn't any priming of the concrete before the application of waterproof membrane. So that's waterproof membrane installer's issue or fault with that, and some examples of subfloor leakage through. So in such a scenario, you get mould and things happening. And if that's all enclosed within a ceiling space underneath, and you get very small amounts of leakage, nothing that's going to cause dripping onto that ceiling, that may go unnoticed for quite a while. And that can be fairly unhealthy to have mould inside your house.
Can I just ask a question?
Yeah.
Mould.
Yeah.
So bathrooms prone to mould,
Yeah.
especially in the grout and so forth.
Yes.
Can the mould sort of penetrate? Like, what are the issues around grout on the bathroom, and what needs to be paid for there?
Oh, so grout. Grout doesn't have to be waterproof. In fact, it's considered that it won't be waterproof. So grout is not actually part of the waterproofing of that. Basically what it does, it fills the gaps in between your tiles and enables some flexibility of that tiling to happen. So our whole tile and grout setup, that's to ensure that most of the water is shed and that water goes towards our drains, etc. But doesn't or shouldn't be considered to contribute towards the waterproofing. So all that waterproofing has to happen from the membrane underneath. Beyond that, I don't actually know that much about, what you should do about, how to handle mould in grout. So it's something I haven't actually looked into myself. Yeah. So a few issues. So surface defect will cause issues with that membrane thickness. Movement of the substrate, so resolve excessive movement, and also no bond break or a poor reinforcing behind there, and possibly inadequate membrane thickness. And here the membrane is not compatible with the tile adhesives. So we've got our tiles popping off or coming free because the tile adhesive is not compatible with the membrane. Top left-hand side, moisture in the substrate before the membrane is installed. That's a top right-hand, particularly poor detail. So all those cavities, etc., those areas, they should be filled with concrete before that waterproofing goes on. The reason for that is you end up, if we've got, say, waterproofing membrane and then a little bit of a dip below and waterproofing membrane like that, and then we fill that with a tile screed later on. That all gets nice and flat and smooth for our tiles. But what we'll end up getting is, if any water makes it through the tile screed, it's always going to be in that area. It's going to find its way down because moisture typically travels downwards, and so that's always going to be a point of issue anyhow, regardless of the fact that we've got lots of sharp edges and so on, which are difficult to waterproof. So best get that smooth beforehand. Issue there, it's not so obvious on the slides from a distance, but this floor drain is sitting up actually higher than the surface, so you'll get water pooling around there, and that's going to cause, it's going to encourage failure of the waterproofing membrane. And then also a crack in the materials and inadequate treatment of that crack in the materials. The reinforcing webbing not wetted out sufficiently, and the membrane not carried under the door. Membrane once again not carried under the door and doesn't have a turn up underneath the door frame. Obviously no bond breaker. So that's in regards to the waterproofing membranes, but also waterproofing in, how do I say it, treatment of water within buildings. That should be considered throughout the whole design process in how we're going to limit the amount of moisture impacting upon the building, whether it be entering the building or even entering the soil around the building, causing movement, etc. So there's also this information on waterproofing for you to have a look at home if you wish, and also the waterproofing the waterproofing video, which is to give instruction to waterproofing installers to install on site, but that gives you some insight into the conditions as well. So, also what we're going to try to cover today are services. Within the services section, we've got a link in regards to smoke alarms. So use that link as a guide for where to install smoke alarms within buildings, and there are requirements around the hardwiring of smoke alarms within a building as well. So these need to be detailed within the initial building details. So various different building services within our standard residential, and then one of the big distinctions between residential buildings and commercial buildings like this, or institutional buildings like this, are the level of services. Obviously, within an institutional building like this, those services are increased and ramped up. But some of those services may exist also within a residential context. So solar power, I think probably everybody in this room would know what solar power is, and of course there's a great deal of development around that, and that's pretty much a given that there's going to be continual development around that, around the efficiency of panels, around the cost of panels, and then associated systems as well. So big thing to watch around that is the cost of batteries and standalone systems. That can be that may prove to be a very big game changer when the cost of standalone systems becomes competitive for people with mains connection to go with those systems. That may very well sort of undermine the market model of the grid system that we have. So an important space to watch and to think about as building designers. So I guess sort of within our lives, within our careers, I think we're going to see a lot of change in that regard. Also, fire suppression systems, something that's not going away, as we need to be. Well, I guess essentially as a result of the Black Saturday fires, the fires that happened in the what's that region called in Victoria here near Melbourne? What do you think? Yeah, it was King Lake. So the fires in that area, most people remember those major bushfires, and you maybe not. We probably weren't in Australia at that point. So there was a very bad fire in Victoria. I can't remember how many people lost their lives. It was a lot of people were killed in these fires. As a result, there was some very hurried legislation put into the National Construction Code in relation to building bushfire-prone areas and dealing with fire systems in buildings in bushfire-prone areas. That very hurried legislation sort of had issues, and then things have sort of been sorting themselves out in subsequent years. So there's a lot of development around treatment of fire within buildings. Certainly around treatment of fire in a commercial context. Much of that hasn't changed significantly in recent years, but in a residential context for building bushfire-prone areas, it has. So that is is an important thing to consider. However, typically it's going to be your local council, the council that's the local council for that development area that will stipulate what you need to do for a fire suppression system. Gas. So yeah, not a great deal of change in this regard, but gas, we can have mains gas or bottled gas, and it's an important consideration to think about what services we have on site in regards to specification of water heaters and cooktops, etc. Various different heating and cooling systems. So as electricity becomes far more expensive, there's a great deal of development in this as well. We won't dwell too much on that today because there is a lot of development in that space, and I think it's contingent upon you to maintain good currency in regards to heating and cooling systems, because that does change a lot. Certainly also telecommunications and data. So those things are going to change. Well, I expect things are going to change significantly in homes in that regard as well, as we sort of hurtle into a lot of technological development, and we'll see the impacts of the national broadband, whether that's there's a large take up of that, or whether that's going to have huge impacts on what we're doing within our homes and the treatment of data within homes. Mains water and collection on site, stormwater retention and detention systems. So I've had a bit of work for the Mitcham Council area in regards to water detention systems, because they've got specifications for some areas there where you need to detain a fair bit of water before it goes to the street. But I heard yesterday that the Teacher Gully implemented the same thing, or have implemented the same thing, to have tanks for water detention. And also a consideration hasn't changed much in recent years, but whether you've got mains sewer or whether you have on-site wastewater treatment. Actually, no, on-site wastewater treatment, those things have changed a bit recently. So the major changes there are that you need to have an engineer specify an on-site wastewater system. So you can't just go. So RI Industries are an important, or a large company that deal with on-site wastewater. You can go straight to RI Industries, and then they can put you on to their preferred person for designing the on-site wastewater, but previously you could just go to them via septic system and have it installed. Now you need to have an engineer specify a system specifically for your property and soil type. So we need to get those bore logs done, etc. So requirements there have ramped up a bit. So moisture, once again, very important consideration in buildings, and both plumbers and electricians have to be licensed to work as a plumber or an electrician. You can't just go and go, all right, yes, I've done a bit of plumbing work, I'll go do some plumbing in my house. Or contract yourself out as a plumber. You need to have that plumbing license. So licensed individual might deal with sanitary plumbing, reticulated water, gas plumbing, or roof plumbing. So we can't forget that we've got a whole lot of water coming off of our roofs, and that also has to be dealt with in a very, very thorough manner as well, because that can impact on the soil around the building, etc. One interesting quirk is that a while back was I do a lot of water systems for stock watering, but also for fire suppression systems. And it's interesting that because I build large water tanks on sites, and it was put to me that I needed to be a licensed plumber to be installing the water for fire systems and the fire couplings and things like that. But then contacted the ombudsman, and the ombudsman said, actually, you don't, because it's non-reticulated water. So there is a little bit of a grey area in that regard. Whereas for dealing with all reticulated water, for all water that comes into houses and reticulated water associated with fire systems, you have to be a licensed plumber. But for installing connections to tanks, etc., for these various different fire suppression systems, that's an area where you don't have to be licensed. So there's some legal things in that. So it's the assembly of pipes and fixtures which use water to disperse of solids, liquid waste to a drainage system. So wastewater fixtures, bath, kitchen, sink, laundry and hand basins. Water carriage system uses water to flush waste away. There was an issue around early two flush systems that didn't have enough water flow to wash things away adequately, but that's not really an issue now with new systems. Also, in regards to building design and building siting, if you have an easement, a sewage easement on the property, as with any easement, it needs to be dealt with in accordance with the holder of that easement. So, in regards to sewage, SA Water holds that easement, and you need to design the location of the building in accordance with that. So they will have their easement for which you can't build on. There may be some areas, or there may be some ability to encroach upon that easement, and if ever you need to do that, you can seek clarification from SA Water. But some general guidelines around building next to those easements. Well, the important one is in relation to our building footings, and then how that impacts upon that sewer main as well. So we have to be aware of exactly where that sewer main is, or the engineer, and engineer design for the structure must ensure that the zone of influence will be clear of the adjacent trench line for an existing or future wastewater main. Our zone of influence, that's not necessarily relating, not necessarily relating to how our footings influence that wastewater main, but how excavation for that wastewater main may influence our footings. And there are general rules about that, as sort of shown in here, but there are also site-specific considerations as well. So that's for the engineers to decide, but you have to be aware that there may be issues that come about from that, particularly with sandy soils. And we've got our diagram down here showing a 45-degree line to our footing. So that's our zone of influence. So if I was to, I'll draw it up a little bit larger here. So building footing, that's our 45-degree line, and that's where we're putting our sewer main in. Now, if I was to run the trencher and then cut into this soil here like this, then this cutting here, it's into that zone of influence of the footings, and that relates to what's called angle of repose of soils. So a clay soil or a moderately loamy soil will have clay soils have a very steep angle of repose. So you cut away a clay soil, it can stand like that sort of angle. Where you dig a hole in sand, as everybody probably knows, dig a hole in sand, has an angle of repose like that. You keep digging in the sand, it just keeps flowing in. So for our various different soil types, there's a different angle of repose. That is going to influence on the zone of influence for the trenching around footings as well. So if we're on a sandy soil, our zone of influence might extend further out, which means that we can't go excavating for trenches right nearby. So that is a consideration for siting for buildings in relation to sewer mains and any other excavations. So but there are some guidelines here about encroachment onto those easements as well. So always be aware that the easy route is to just leave easements alone, don't build on easements, but there are always some possibilities there for you. if you want to look into those to encroach upon easements, but that has to be done in accordance with the easement holder. So sewage systems, series of pipes connecting sewer to a connection point located at the site boundary. All pipe work before the boundary is the property owner's responsibility, and all fixtures must comply with the requirements of SA Water. All pipe work from the boundary to the treatment plant is the responsibility of SA Water. So a bit of a refresher or revision from our first assignment. Actually, this one probably, I don't know if it should remove it from the slides now or not. So various different on-site wastewater systems. This one I think is fairly good on-site wastewater system, but last time I spoke with them, they had issues in meeting the new SA Health on-site wastewater requirements for acceptance by engineers, and so I'm not sure if Septec is still doing this. So you've got various different on-site wastewater suppliers. Septec, a fairly small company based in Strathaven, they did this sand filter, which is a low energy use. So your various different on-site or your aerated septic systems use a lot of electricity to aerate within their aeration chambers. The Septec system used a sand filter, and then it's called a pressure dosed system. So they've got water goes into the septic tank and then into the distribution box for going through the sand filter, and then it's pumped out of there and then pumped either to sprinklers or a pressure dosed underground system. Where you can't do soakage, so river shacks is an important one. For any of the river shacks under the 1956 flood level, they all, there was a stipulation, there was a way that a lot of shacks were leasehold, and people couldn't actually own the shacks, they could only own the lease to them, and hence couldn't borrow money from the bank to buy one. Then in sort of around 2000, or in sort of 98 to 2000, those years, state government was fairly aggressive in privatising those shacks and selling off the leaseholds. But to make that possible, all the shack owners had to invest in common effluent systems, because you can't do septic soakage underneath the 1956 flood level. So to ensure water safety, not contamination of the River Murray, and as a stipulation of the privatisation of those leases, shack owners had to go to common effluent systems. So that's where you'll typically see that within South Australia. You get your bunch of shacks, and then all that effluent will go into one system, and then that's treated up back away from the river, the common effluent systems. So those photos, they don't necessarily relate to what we have here in South Australia. That's more for the large scale common effluent. With a standard septic tank, which is a possibility in some areas. However, it's basically you have to go with aerated systems now. So you may be able to go with a septic tank if a wastewater engineer designs it, but typically you have to go with aerated systems. But in that system, the effluent just simply breaks down inside the tank, and then it's in several chambers, and then water passes out and goes to typically underground soakage. So and septic tanks need to be pumped periodically, because what they get is sludge deposited down the bottom, and then that sludge ends up filling up the tank, and then that needs to be pumped out.
I believe that's what we've got up in the country.
Right, so you've got the septic tank, yeah. And and it has to be, so annually or?
Every 2 years, I think.
Every 2 years, yeah. It'd be about the same for our, we've got an old septic tank as well on ours. And that's an interesting thing about the whole septic thing is that for a new development within rural areas or so where we don't have sewer systems, for any of those developments, the legislation is really stringent about the treatment of wastewater, and it's very expensive and very stringent, and yet there are many really bad systems. I'm not saying yours are bad or mine's bad, but there are many really bad treatment systems for existing properties that will just go on and be, contaminate waterways and so on. And there's no picking up of those. It seems to be quite a dichotomy between, consideration of those systems. So a lot of, and now, I know some people who were going to upgrade to an aerated wastewater treatment system, but then had a look at what was required through the council and through SA Health, and decided to bodgy up their existing system as it was, as opposed to upgrading the system to being a much more environmentally friendly system, because the hoops jumped through to upgrade that system were too great. They decided to go with the old system. So there's certainly some issues around that as well, with existing versus new. With our water systems, various traps and gullies. So that's for your plumber to design and install. But some simple concepts around traps is they stop the flow of air back through a plumbing system. So we have that water that sits in the trap continuously to ensure we don't get gases passing back through. If, for example, or I think on the next slide we show, so ventilation, So ventilation on the outside of the building ensures that there is always water that stays within that trap, because once the water goes past that P trap, there's some suction of that water, and the vent allows the suction of air into that system to allow the water to flow downhill, and you've always got water sitting in that trap. If, for example, we decided to block off an air vent outside, we put some paving over it or something like that, the side effect from that is that the water can suck all the water as it's going down the pipe, can suck all the water out of the trap, and we get bad smells in the house as a result, because we get gases passing back through the system. So here's a typical plumbing run detail. So was it 3,500, I think? Yeah, so it's in accordance with Australian Standard 3,500, how to design our plumbing runs. I think it's best to rely on a plumber to design the plumbing runs in accordance with that. For one place, I was doing, the wastewater engineer said, "Oh, Mike, you should be able to design those plumbing runs in accordance with the wastewater system." So it's something that's not too difficult, but it's outside the scope of what we teach in the course here, but it's not too onerous. But that is our standard details around that. So IO for inspection opening. An IS for inspection shaft. The difference between that is shaft is elevated, so as the plumber or as the pipe gets further down underground, you have to have a shaft for that inspection. WC for toilet course and TR for trap. And then our air vent that happens upstream of our inspection openings there. Does that one have a Yeah, so we've just got one vent in this system here. So everybody probably would have seen those vent pipes on the sides of houses. So 40 mil diameter pipe going up the side of the house, have you seen that? Probably. So that's the function of those vents, is to stop water getting sucked out of the traps. So a detailed plumbing layout with all the leaders showing what all our types of plumbing are. You'll notice on this diagram that we've got floor traps in both our wet areas, and that all of our waste pipes. Actually, this one's interesting. This one's split. So we've got bath, basin going to floor trap, whereas we've got shower, toilet going to the 100 pipe going out. So our toilets have to be 100mm pipes going out, and you'll see that when you see slabs being put down. But then we've got our shower and just our shower and toilet linking into that one. Typically, what we have is our hand basin, bath, shower going into our floor trap, and then that going out. But yeah, study that detail, or study that in detail at home if you wish. But I think best to have a plumber design the actual water, so all your waste pipe design for the dwelling. So reticulated water, that means mains water. That's water that comes from the mains system. And if you have composite systems where you have mains water connection and also on-site storage, so tanks, and then your tanks are plumbed into your house, you have to have backflow protection before the water main. So you have to ensure that none of your tank water makes its way back into the reticulated water system. So a non-return valve at or before on your side of the water main. And a non-return valve is just a very, very simple box with a brass plate flat inside there that as water tries to go back the other way, flow back the wrong way, it just shuts off. Fairly simple system. So water supply is provided by SA Water, and they are incredibly stringent about the quality of their water. So hence those requirements around a non-return valve. So it must be drinkable. It must have adequate pressure to supply all fixtures. So various different details. I'll enable you to go through that at home. I've covered all that. So gas to houses, that must be installed by a plumber with gas fitters. They must be registered as a gas fitter, so they have to have the qualifications specifically around the gas fitting. It will typically be to hot water services, indoor heaters, cooktops, possibly barbecues outside to save you filling up gas bottles, and pool and spa heaters. A bit of revision probably for assignment 1. So water supply, sewer drainage, that's SA Water. Unsewered areas, we've got septic tank systems, must comply with the local council, and also must comply with SA Health on-site wastewater treatment guidelines. And before the lecture, I put that link on Moodle to the SA Health on-site wastewater guidelines. for some insight into design of those on-site systems. Electricity must comply with also M&Dpclass9, so it's SA power networks. Gas must comply with Investra or AGN, Australian Gas Networks, and then telephone with Telstra or any mobile providers. So electrical, that has to be done by a qualified electrician as well, can't be done by anybody else, and you know, so the reasons for that are fairly obvious. It's a very, very dangerous thing, and you may remember back to the home insulation scheme that the government rolled out a while back, possibly a very good scheme, but there were loopholes or there were issues that happened because of the installation of reflective foil insulation using metal staples in roofs that had poor electrical fit outs. So that they were electrifying the roofs and caused the death of several people. But also, yeah, in terms of fires in buildings, so a great deal of fires in buildings are caused by either faulty electrical work or faulty electrical appliances. Distribution to the house is either going to be as 415 or 240. Can anybody tell me? Well, actually no. I'll explain that. 240. That's our standard. So that's what we call. Actually, I'm not sure what we call it. I think that's called single phase power. But we also have 415 volts supplied to some buildings as well, and that's what's called three-phase power. When you go to do the connection of a building to the electrical or the mains electrical system, one of the first questions your electrician is going to ask you is, what power do you want connected? Do you want single phase 240 or three phase 415? The reason you might have to upgrade to three-phase power is to power air conditioning. So that's the main reason. So some people use three-phase power for welders and all these sorts of things as well. So if it's a rural setting, possibly you want three-phase power for the sheds and for bore pumps and all that sort of stuff. You can use three-phase power. But in a residential setting, typically three-phase is used for large refrigerated air conditioning systems on roofs. So be aware of that if you are designing a very large place that's going to have a refrigerated air conditioning system, you're probably going to want to upgrade the connection to 415. Various different types of electrical supply. There's overhead, over to under, and underground. So by and large, what we deal with now is underground power supply. So with those underground power supplies, obviously you have to comply, or you don't have to comply with easements, but you should be aware of those easements. And if you are wanting to encroach upon an easement held by SA Power Networks, that you contact SA Power Networks and provide them with all the information and get confirmation from SA Power Networks in writing that you can encroach upon that easement in that specified manner. So typically we don't, but there are some avenues for that. I won't go into all of these because this is more sort of a bit more antiquated systems now than what we see. But one thing I will mention, also in regards to siting of buildings in relation to power lines, I'll let you know there are two types of easements on land. There are the easements which are lodged on the title, and then there are also statutory easements. So statutory easements, that means that SA Power Networks can enforce an easement on that property, whether it's shown on the title or not. A typical example of that is where you've got high voltage overhead power lines. Now, probably not everyone wants to live under high voltage overhead power lines anyhow. So quite often, it's not a consideration. But for some developments and some situations, you have to be aware of those statutory easements. So we've got a block of land like this, and then our power line running across that. Now there's no easement on that property, and so we go, all right, let's build our house right here. What we still need to do is we still need to contact SA Power Networks to get their approval to build under that high tension power line. And that approval is going to be contingent predominantly on how high the roof is and how close we end up getting to that overhead power line. Yes, they will want access, so if we've got a pole here, they will want vehicular access to those poles, so sort of 6 metre wide access. But then, as the power lines are going over the top, there are dimensions. I think it's 5 metres from the ridge, and I think I can't say off the top of my head, but there is the SA Power Networks refer to what's called the Office of the Technical Regulator, and they will specify for your development what you can and cannot do in regards to that power line. But typically we're dealing with distances of about that, so that 5 or 6 metres from ridge heights of roofs. Also, other important terminology in regards to electricity supply are things like service fuse. So previously a lot of service fuses were located on power poles. Now some of them are located within service pits, but more frequently those service fuses are located within meter boxes for dwellings now. So the location of that service fuse, that delineates who is responsible for the aspects of repair and reinstatement to those services. So anything before the service fuse is the responsibility of SA Power Networks. So if that fails, if something fails there as a result and you don't have power to your house because of a problem before the service fuse, then that's something that SA Power Networks has to rectify. If something happens after the service fuse, then that's something that you yourself have to rectify. Also, other important terminology is what's called consumer mains. So we've got consumer terminals, which is the house, but consumer mains, that's anything that runs between the service fuse and the building itself. Within rural areas, there's the stipulation now, and I think it's impossible to get around, basically, is that you have to have your electricity meter within 10 metres of the boundary of that property. So if we're building a new house on a vacant lot up in the hills there somewhere, we have to have our meter box within 10 metres of that boundary, and then we have to run a consumer mains from that to our house. And then we, as the building owners or occupants or your clients, they are responsible for the maintenance of that consumer main. So SA Power Networks are only responsible for that first 10 metres. So some more important terminology. So meter enclosure. So that's the box that encloses our meter. A switchboard, so that carries the fuses and circuit breakers, etc. to the house. Circuit, that's so an electrical circuit, one run with the switchboard feeding appliances or subboards. Each circuit is fused, and then from that circuit you can have various different sub-circuits. So feed it to a sub-switchboard. GPO, so that's not the post office, that is the general purpose outlet for power supply. So typically within your drawings, you don't call them PowerPoints, you call them GPOs. so general purpose outlets. Fixed appliance, it's fairly bit of a no-brainer. And then earth. Within Australia, so we differ from other countries in this regard, we actually have an earth wire as well built into our electrical supply within houses to ensure that any leakage of power is earthed. So that leakage of power goes back to the ground rather than having building elements which are live. Also, important thing in regards to excavation for services, so excavation in relation to the supply of power. Your trenches have to be 600 millimetres deep. They also, what's not stated on there is they also that any electrical supply has to happen inside a conduit, so it's a plastic pipe, and then on top of that conduit you've got, or you fill a little bit of soil and then you lay down this tape saying there's an electrical supply underneath, and then you fill those trenches over top of that. That's to ensure that anybody who's excavating in that area after that, they'll first hit this piece of tape that says, oh, there's an electrical supply here, and they won't dig any further. So that's to flag that. Yeah, we've hit our time for today. So the slides go on with heating and cooling, various evaporative coolers, etc. So yeah, I encourage you to keep abreast of the various different types of heating and cooling in houses and understand what's most applicable to your clients. Yeah, various different systems, evaporative coolers and refrigerated. So evaporative uses far less energy but requires what adds to the humidity of buildings. And then various different split systems. So split systems really getting quite cheap to install, and yeah, so it's a very cheap systems and can be easily controlled. And also solid fuel heaters, so such as fireplaces, combustion heaters, etc. And also be aware that there are stringent guidelines around the installation of flues in buildings as well, in regards to where they go in terms of building elements such as rafters and trusses and so on as they exit through roofs. So be aware that the National Construction Code covers that as well if you're going to be installing fireplaces in buildings. Yeah. Also, another one quickly before we close. Various radiant heaters. So they're becoming really quite cheap now. You typically see them in cafes outside. These black strips that emit heat. So they're becoming fairly cheap as well for installation into buildings, and they're not as energy intensive as some other heating systems as well. So they're starting to get used in a residential context a lot more now as well. So that's it. And also, as I said earlier, refer within the Moodle for this, or the Learn page for this, there is the PDF on smoke alarms, and then various different links in regards to those smoke alarms as well. So I think that link will take you to the MFS site. So the Metropolitan Fire Service PDF on their installation location of smoke alarms. So thank you once again